host, Anne Marie, and this is Tidbits from a Chief of Staff. I am beyond excited for my special guest today, Scott Van Vliet. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on my little show.
Emery, it's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Scott is a senior executive that has worked at multiple tech companies. He worked at the largest toy company and also led a team at a rocket science company. So literally, if we'd have a conversation and I'd say, well, is it rocket science? You'd be the person to say, yes, it is, or no, it's not, right?
Well, I've had the pleasure of working with rocket scientists and folks who've done incredible work building, vehicles for space. I wouldn't dare say I'm a rocket scientist, but I know some.
Yes, yes, you do. Awesome. Well, so what I really wanted to do, because I'm going to jump right into it with you, I am talking to folks who are learning about the chief of staff role and folks who are in the chief of staff role and they're just trying to up their game. And as an executive, can you tell me the reasons why you would have a chief of staff?
That's a great question, Emery. Thanks again for having me here because I think it's such an important topic to address. As an executive, I'm pulled in lots of different directions. In the current role that I'm in at Microsoft, I have responsibilities for product, for engineering, and partnering with design and sales and marketing in the field. And so a lot of my time is spent kind of bifurcated or trifurcated or federated, if you will, across so many different areas of responsibility, including managing large teams, managing teams across multiple geographies. And one of the critical unlocks for me in my career as I've become a more senior executive responsible for larger businesses and larger teams, that chief of staff role has really been, as I mentioned, a critical unlock. The ability to have someone who at the executive level understands I'm responsible for, but can also act on my behalf
Yeah.
in various contexts, kind of gives me an extension of the executive office to not only like run our rhythm of business, we could again hopefully talk through lots of those things that the individual in that role provides, but allows me to kind of be in multiple places at one time. It provides me with the structure for running the rhythm of business, for addressing strategic and tactical things. Again, because a lot of what I do as an executive is kind of context shift. I'm constantly juggling between very tactical issues to long-term strategies, to fiscal year planning, to talent reviews, to community town halls, to product truth and engineering on calls. You could imagine it's just this broad world. Having a chief of staff really helps me scale.
Nice. So I was actually going to ask you, what is your biggest value add? And I think you just identified it. It's the ability for you to scale, to have somebody represent you, understanding what's going on in the business, and then literally manage the staff, manage a lot of that tactical aspect so you can focus on those critical things at a very strategic and high level with your partner executives. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's right. I think scaling is kind of the key vector for what a chief of staff is, at least in my experience, has helped me do. In some cases, like I said, it's being in multiple places at once. I can delegate responsibility to my chief of staff to attend meetings or drive things on my behalf. But it's also kind of that thought partner,
Yeah.
having that chief of staff in many meetings with me and executive reviews. Um, they're not just an administrative function. They actually have to have an understanding of the business. They have to have an understanding of our product, of our teams, of the markets we serve, of the customers we serve.
Yeah.
And that gives them that unique ability to bring, in a world where there's a massive list of things to do, if I needed help triaging, like, hey, this week, like, what are we focusing on? Not necessarily a calendar, but more of like outcomes we're trying to drive. She or he can be that individual who helps me achieve those outcomes or achieve those goals. And so it's kind of a little bit of a secret sauce that I really appreciate.
That's awesome. I love that you said they help you drive outcomes. And I think sometimes that's not always super visible. But when you're working with an executive who you truly are partnering with, and I have had the pleasure of knowing a chief of staff that you had on your team previously, and she has been an extremely amazing mentor and thought partner for me. But the fact that you are close to that person and they understand what's Scott thinking, how can I help Scott? How can I be an extension of Scott? And then we can get into a room and we can whiteboard, and talk about these are the things that you're trying to accomplish. And this is what I'm going to take off your plate. Again, such an important function and such a key role for you to be able to help your organization recognize success, right?
That's right. That's right.
Awesome.
Yeah, and what I'd say too is that same individual we're talking about is a dear friend and somebody I've relied on for many years to support me in this capacity. It's been a critical capability for me at various companies, including the Rocket Company and at Microsoft, in achieving some scale.
Awesome. So now, as you've worked with different chief of staffs, because I'm sure you've had more than one, what's something that you could share with my listeners that's like a gotcha, or make sure that you're aware of this because this could be something that could trip you up?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I would say um, there's a tendency, or there can be a tendency, um, for people to think about the chief of staff role as a purely administrative role.
Yeah.
And I've seen people be very successful in executing in a business management or administrative role as a chief of staff. And that's awesome. But I think you can fall into the trap of kind of delegating responsibilities of more of the basics of running the business and not really think about that person as a strategic extension of your capabilities. I've
Yeah.
seen other, chiefs of staff in the company at Microsoft that I've worked with who are responsible for much larger scopes than I am in supporting executives more senior in the organization to me. And they have that strategic checkbox where they're
Yep.
actually driving that and they have the support of their senior executives to be a strategic arm for them. But I've also seen the counter, which is, hey, this is purely a business management function. They run a rhythm of business. They run kind of the weekly business review or these kind of mechanisms or product review or program reviews, and then that's it. I think that's definitely something that is part of the responsibility of that role, but it's kind of marginalizing, and you're not really getting the kind of maximum opportunity that role provides. And so I think having again, taking a step back and thinking, hey, am I really thinking about this role in the right way? Because
Right.
again, depending on the scope of responsibilities you have, depending on the size of the organization that you have or the business that you're running, you may not necessitate a chief of staff. And that's okay. Like a chief of staff isn't to me some like distinguished title to have as an executive that I have a chief of staff.
Right.
No, it's actually a very strategic function. And in many cases, maybe you just need a business manager. If your organization is of a particular size or scope or effort, maybe having a business manager gives you the scale you need to achieve your goals. But if you're
Yeah.
going to have somebody in a chief of staff capacity, make sure that you're leveraging them to maximize the value that they can bring. Because the people who are the most successful in that role will have that dynamism of strategic thinker and ability to execute rhythms and kind of tactical work.
Awesome. One other thing along that point, because I think it's really important, you've highlighted the differences between a true chief of staff and a business manager. How can you tell if your business, like you said, it depends on the size and the scope? How do you tell that, nope, I actually do need a chief of staff for my business because these are the outcomes I'm driving for?
Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of organizations will typically use org size, right?
Uh,
It's the easiest way to articulate that. Say, okay, if your organization is 500 people or more, then maybe you necessitate a chief of staff, or 1,000 people or more, or if it's smaller than that, like that's certainly one vector that you
mhm.
can choose to drive and make those decisions. And I think that's fine for those organizations or those teams that want to manage that way. What I also think is there are likely um, intangibles that exist in a given organization. And some of those intangibles might be the scope of complexity of the work. So you may not have a large team, but if you
Uh,
are working on AI innovation or developing a new product or new product in an existing market that your company doesn't have a footprint in, you might need to do very strategic business planning, very strategic work where a chief of staff can help you scale, especially if it's a large organization that has support functions that you're working across. The
yeah,
size of the organization itself may not be the only indicator of requiring a chief of staff. Excuse
gotcha.
me. And so I think there are other things: technical depth, the complexity of the business, the novelty of the experience you're trying to build, the strategy that you're trying to implement. For example, if you're in the business of M&A, and you're thinking about growing your business through acquisitions and strategy, in many cases that chief of staff can provide insights into kind of the corporate development side and strategic thinking about the plans of acqui-hires or whatever thing you might be working on. These
Yeah.
are all intangibles that describe kind of that value. And that's why in some cases you'll see people who are in a de facto chief of staff role, but are actually like a principal product manager or a program manager because they're
Mhm.
playing that strategic card, but they're actually de facto acting as a chief of staff for that team.
That is awesome. So first of all, thank you again. Like I learned from you just listening, and I'm like, oh, I need to remember some of this stuff. So talking to you is always just fabulous. This has been the highlight of my day. We're going to be signing off, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. Are there any closing remarks you wanted to share with my audience before I sign off?
Well, I would certainly say listen to Anne-Marie. She has an incredible amount of experience and insight, and I've had the pleasure of working with her and learning from her as we've grown together. And tune into her channel and her content to learn more about the importance of this role as she explores her journey.
Awesome. Folks, that was Scott Van Vliet. As you can tell, this was an amazing session. I know you got a lot of stuff out of it because I got a lot of stuff out of it. I look forward to continuing to talk to you, Scott. Like I said, it's always a highlight of my day. This was the long story short with Anne-Marie, tidbits from your chief of staff, and I will see you in our next tuning. Bye, and thanks again, Scott.
Bye.